from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you will know that we can communicate directly because you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching the program on. They will appear here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And I love that aspect of this program, and I enjoy spending this time of day with you each day. Today, we're going to talk about the Festival of Samhain, which we are celebrating next week here in the Northern Hemisphere. And hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. Good to see you, Michael. In the Southern Hemisphere, of course, they'll be celebrating Beltane. And I've remarked in the past that I very often now will acknowledge both sabbats in the same ritual, and have found a great deal of expanded knowledge in terms of how they reflect the same qualities in opposing ways, which I find to be an aspect of the Wheel of the Year I did not understand in my latter years, but I find it very informative and very important to know now. Hello to Tom in the chat room. Good to see you, Tom. And hello to Janet in the chat room. Good to see you. Um, This Saturday, October 28th at 8 p.m. Central or 9 p.m. Eastern, I will be having a Samhain ritual here on Pagan World TV, and we are calling it Calling the Ancestors, and that's exactly what it's going to be about. Because at least in our modern practice, that's what this holiday is about. The holiday of Samhain honors our ancestors and that which has gone before us. And we often speak about the veil being thinned at this time of year, although I have to tell you that um, as a medium, for me, I find it's always thin, and I think that that's more a matter of perception and individual attunement. But then again, because I have this as one of my specialties, I'm speaking of my own experience. But traditionally, the belief was that the veil thinned both at Beltane and at Samhain, and that these were the two turning points of the year in the Celtic calendar. Um, how did it get into um, the world calendar, for want of a better way to put it? Well, in the latter period of what's sometimes called the Dark Ages, the Celtic Church was the leading branch of Christianity for a short period of time, and their attitudes on most subjects were very different from what would later come with the dominance of the Roman Church. And one of the things they did is they adopted a lot of practices, including the four great uh, s- celebrations of the Celtic year, into the Catholic calendar. So if you ever wonder why the dates of these four Celtic festivals are observed far beyond Celtic lands, it was their inclusion in that Catholic calendar that actually carried them farther around the world. A lot of people forget this or didn't know it, and it's kind of important to remember. Um, and it was there in those later eras that some of these dates became very closely associated with magic and witchcraft and so forth. Not always exactly as they had been in the earlier Celtic era, but this is what happens. We live, we grow, we develop. Soen, um, well, first it has several pronunciations. And of course, everyone always likes to say that Samhain is not one of those pronunciations, and no, it's not. Um, but it is one of the things you often hear, and you often hear people say that because they are not familiar with the Celtic pronunciation. The Celtic pronunciation is Soen or Samhain or Samhain. It varies according to exactly where you're looking and when you're looking. And hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you. One of the things that I often find interesting is that around this time of year, you'll meet a lot of people very, very firmly correcting people's pronunciation on Samhain. Those people who mispronounce it as Samhain, but you'll notice they don't do the same with Beltane, which is just as bad a mispronunciation of that holiday as Samhain is of Samhain. But people, for some reason, embrace one and not the other. My attitude is that pronunciation isn't what matters. It's, do you understand the holiday? And what is this holiday? In modern practice, it is the feast of the dead, the feast of the ancestors, the time to remember that which has gone before, the time to honor your family, spiritual or physical. In our community, we have many people who are estranged from their physical family, but have a robust philosophical family that they are part of. And, in my mind, it doesn't matter which one you're honoring as your ancestors. Your ancestors are the people who made you who you are, not necessarily biologically. They are the people who have influenced you, who have helped you to become who you are and what you are. When I think of my ancestors, which I've been doing a lot lately as I've been writing the Corellian Book of the Dead, um, the people that I include in that number obviously include the Corellian ancestors, the ancestors of the physical house of High Corel. However, I also include many philosophical ancestors, such as Eleanor Royce, who I've talked about sometimes, the Rolls Royce of psychics, um, a woman who was a great influence on my life, Rosemary Fletcher. Um, I don't have a lot of interaction with her as an ancestor, but I certainly would consider her one, even though we have no physical relation. Um, and, people like this. Katrina, Saint Katrina of the Paladins. I certainly count among my ancestors, even though she was young enough to be my daughter and not physically related to me, but as a person in my life, she had a huge influence, and as a spirit, she has a huge influence. Therefore, she is among the ancestors as I look at it. And what I would say to you, as you approach this Samhain holiday, if you're not on good terms with your physical family, remember they're not the only people who constitute family. If you don't feel a strong connection to your biological ancestors, there are also philosophical ancestors. Look at those. Or, best of all, like myself, look at both. Because to me, it's all those people now in spirit that we interacted with who made us who we are, that we are honoring at this time. And if you look around the world, you'll find many different ways of honoring the ancestors at this time. Again, far beyond the Celtic origin of the holiday, because the Roman Catholic Church took it around the world as the Feast of All Saints, which is the Christian version of the Feast of the Ancestors. And so, in any country that had a heavy Roman Catholic presence, you will find um, a continuing observation of these customs. One of the most common things is to visit the cemetery, often to have meals there, otherwise to have honorary meals at the home, setting a place for the ancestors. Some people set out lights for them to guide their journeys as they return to the world at this time. Um, there are a lot of things that people do around the world, and a lot of uniformity of these customs, which is not due to their ancient Celtic origin so much as to the dissemination that they experienced in the Middle Ages. Which is not to say that there's really a strong break between these things. In a lot of ways, those customs that were solidified and transmitted in the Middle Ages do come from older things. Not necessarily always Celtic, because the aspects of meeting ancestor ceremonies from different cultures found their way into how we acknowledge this holiday, and you will find um, you'll find it continuing to be acknowledged under different names in different places. So, in a manner of speaking, um, it's a very widespread holiday shared by a number of religions. One of the things I like to talk about, people often talk about, people in the pagan community often talk about how Christians stole all our stuff, meaning that many Christian holidays were strongly influenced by pagan holidays. I prefer to think of it as a cultural sharing, as something that can bind us together despite all the things that tend to push us apart. That we do have certain shared customs. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I see it as potentially a very good thing. But anything that gets your foot in the door, um, in my opinion, is good. Anything that helps with communication, anything that helps people, when you're a part of a minority religion or group, anything that helps that wider society to see you as being a person like themselves is good. So I've known a lot of witches over the years who hated the way that Halloween is celebrated. I love Halloween. I love those customs, and I don't see them at being at great variance from our own. Um, they aren't what you would call traditional Samhain things. Um, you certainly would not historically see um, people going around in Frankenstein monster costumes at this time. But on the other hand, there was a custom of wearing costumes representing creatures of the other world, on the premise that at this time of year they were about, and you wanted to be taken for being one of them rather than not one of them should you happen to encounter them. And pardon my nose, it's fall, there are allergies. And this is very much what the modern costuming is all about, the same basic idea. I see no reason to be upset about it. Every year at this time, you'll find some witches who are very, very upset by green-faced witches, and you'll find that nonsense about, oh, this is because of the witch hunts and how they saw them. Green-faced witches came in with The Wizard of Oz in 1938, and there is no depiction of a green-faced witch preceding that. And they did it because of Technicolor, pure and simple. They wanted to make the most use of it. And the witch in the movie was not green-faced because she was a witch, but because she was a Winky. And if you look at the other Winky characters, they all have the same skin color. But that is a tangent we don't need to go down. Getting back to Samhain, this is our time to focus on our ancestors. Now, as a Corellian, I'm always, to some extent, focused on my ancestors. It's a very important part of my Corellian practice, a part of my life that has been very large in my life. From childhood till now, the ancestors have always been a major presence, and I'm sure as long as I am on this earth, that will remain the case. Um, but at Samhain, we set aside special time to remember them. And I think this is very important. Whether ancestor veneration is part of your normal practice or not, I think it's important for us to stop and remember where we come from, to remember how we got here, to remember the people who brought us here, even if sometimes we weren't always on the best terms with them, and to remember both our biological and our philosophical ancestors. Now, in the Calling the Ancestors ceremony on Saturday, what we're going to do is exactly what it sounds like. We are going to call forth the ancestors and receive messages from them. That includes the Corellian ancestors. It also includes your ancestors if you join the ceremony. And I'm not going to tell you all of the details, but ideally, you should be receiving messages from your ancestors as well. And that is part of what we want to do. And, in my practice, this is really always part of the Samhain holiday, but this year I wanted to put some special emphasis on it. And, it's been a while since I was doing regular ritual. Um, oh, and hello to Othela Jade. It's good to see you. And I hadn't realized that that jade rising was Othila jade. It's so good to see you. Um, Samhain again is the time that we should be taking time to bring forth the message of our ancestors. But this is also something that's always good for us to do. Um, it's part of staying in touch with our higher selves, part of staying in touch with our spirit guides. And in my experience, the ancestors have never really led me wrong. I've misinterpreted them a few times, but they've never really led me wrong. And there have been times when the road has seemed brighter or darker, depending on where I was, but they've always led me up the road, and the road has always gone forward, ultimately to where it needed to be, to where um, it should be. And so I'm a great believer in staying connected with your ancestors. Now, if you would like to learn more about how to do that, we have a new book coming out on November 11th, The Corellian Book of the Dead. Um, and it's our hope it will actually be in the hands of people who have pre-ordered it by the 11th. Um, and I'm looking at putting in the publication order within the next 24 hours. Um, and it's a lovely book. It speaks about all the things that I think you would need to know to work with the ancestors and to understand the concept of the ancestors. And one of the things we're often asked about is how can we be believers in both ancestral spirits and reincarnation? And if you follow my work, you've undoubtedly heard me speak about that before, but it's in the book. And we talk at some detail about why both of these things can be true at the same time. We also we also speak about probabilities. If you have studied through the Corellian system, you will already know what the term probabilities means, but it's in the book. And that is the idea that there can be multiple variations on a single incarnation. Um, we talk about parallel lifetimes. We talk about how to get messages from your ancestors, how to commune with your ancestors and make offerings to your ancestors. We talk about the rights of the dead. And some of those can be very important, some are less important. The ceremony of crossing over is arguably the most important, in my view, because anyone who is crossing or has crossed will benefit from that ceremony. And if you are one of those people who works with spirits a lot, you will find from time to time spirits who are caught between the worlds and having difficulty crossing over. That's what this rite is about. It's how to help a spirit cross over um, into the next world if they happen to be caught between. It also is very good to do for those who are crossing, are about to cross, or have just crossed, to help prepare that way for them or to help them make that connection after the fact. Even if they cross perfectly naturally, as many do, it's still a good rite to do, um, to ensure that this is the case. We also talk about things like funerals, the anniversaries of the ancestors, and of course, we also talk about the future. And one of the things that I think distinguishes Corellianism, and we've wrote about at great length in a variety of places, is the idea that we're in the midst of an evolution. No, we're always in the midst of an evolution. Um, Life is about evolution. Uh, but right now, we are, as a people, evolving, as a species evolving, as a planet evolving. Um, there was a wonderful new study put out, a paper put out recently that talked about the idea that everything that exists evolves, and often all at once. And this was a scientific paper. I mean, this is not an idea that's unfamiliar to me or to us. We've talked about it for years, but the fact that we would be seeing it as a scientific paper is very hopeful, I think. And one of the things it talks about is that even minerals have evolved as what's available in their composition has changed and increased over time. Um, and hello to Yazo Nix in the chat room. It's good to see you, Yazo. Um, and this is very much in keeping with Corellian teaching that we're seeing changes in the world, but those changes are ultimately evolutionary. And one of the things we expect to see is increasing psychic ability among people, increasing psychic expression in life. And as far as the Book of the Dead goes, the main thing we talk about there is the idea of conscious incarnation, the idea um, that you can basically come back in your next life to pick up where you left off in this one if you're doing that kind of spiritual work. It's not something you would want to do if you're not doing that kind of spiritual work. But if you're involved in a major spiritual process, which may take multiple generations, it's a very good thing to do. Now, we talk about in the book how it has its pros and it has its cons. Um, that's why I say if you're not, um, well, I do believe eventually everyone will do it. And we'll have to find ways to deal with those cons. At this time, it's the people who are doing heavy spiritual work who do it. I think within even maybe just a couple of generations, we may see everyone starting to do it. We may start to see not many disconnected incarnations, but it may start to seem like one long integrated incarnation that we are having, which I think is a lot of. And Yaso says, I have seen people have no idea what is happening to them. This is a great shift, or this great shift is frightening for some. And hello to Jason in the chat room. And yes, it is. A lot of people don't have any clue what's happening. Um, and without the knowledge of what's happening, without the knowledge that this is an evolution and that certain things must fall away for other things to evolve, it is frightening. Um, and I was very fortunate to come from the background that I came from because these things were discussed in my childhood. I mean, I remember people talking about what we now call climate change long before it found its way into into the mainstream community, long before you heard scientists talking about it in the modern sense. And they were talking about it largely in terms of prophecy, the things that Edgar Casey had said, and certain other 20th century prophets in particular, um, which now seem to align with what science is saying, given some question, some warping here and there. And I talk about how the messenger can warp the message by not having enough reference, and this also we talk about at some length in the Book of the Dead. Um, and this is an example. Edgar Casey had a number of prophecies regarding the coastlines of the United States, quote, falling into the sea, end quote. And no one would back that idea literally today. But the idea of the sea rising up to cover the coastlines is now quite a common concept and something that we're in fact seeing in certain places. Um, but that was apparently not a wording that Casey had to describe what he was seeing in his visions, but the vision still is relevant. Now, hello to Elisa in the chat room. Elisa says, "Do you believe in astrology?" Well, yes, I do. I believe in astrology. Um, I have used it rather extensively at certain points in my life. At one point, I wrote the astrological calendar notebook for Llewellyn back in the very early 90s. And I do, however, believe that astrology works on a mathematical basis. Um, that when we talk about planets and stars, they're not causing the effects that we see, they mark them. Um, they have served us as markers in time that we have used um, to map the ways in which the cycles of time repeat themselves. That's my belief about astrology. One of the reasons I believe that is that if you look at how we normally practice astrology in the Western world, it's far it's departed by centuries from where the planets and constellations actually would appear to be if you're looking directly at them in a physical sense. It's following the mathematical precedent, and yet it still works. It works in my life, um, and so obviously something else is happening. So I believe that astrology is how we map the patterns of time. And I was talking just yesterday um, on how one of the books that I learned a great deal about astrology from was Heaven Knows What by Grant Louis, written many decades ago. And um, I had done my own chart using this book. And I was reading the different aspects because it goes through all the different aspects. And it's one of the best interpretations of astrological aspects I could recommend to you if you want to learn how the planets correspond to each other. But one of the things it talked about was that I would that people with a particular aspect that I have would tend to be celebrated because of their voice. And at the time I was reading it, that was not the case at all. And yet, all these years later, I get so many compliments on my voice. And one of the things that I'm about to do for my Patreon is start reading stories and other things. And you'll probably start to see this happening elsewhere. Also because people say they love my voice. So I'm going to give them more of it. But when I read this, that was not yet the case, nor could I see the circumstances in which it would become the case. But it did. And I have found that to be an example of how astrology can be very, very, very accurate, even when it doesn't seem like it's going to be. Um, Another one I remember from that book, I had done my grandmother's uh, horoscope. And in heaven knows what, it talks about how she had Venus and Mars conjunct. And it describes it as being the it aspect, the it conjunction, meaning that it creates a very magnetic personality. And that certainly described my grandmother. And Nyaza says, I find this to be the most exciting and fascinating time to be incarnate. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us all. Thank you, Yaza. And hello to Linda in the chat room. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed the program. And I'd like to ask you to join me for the Calling the Ancestors ceremony this Saturday evening at 8 p.m. Central. And I think that you will find it a rewarding experience. And I thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow I will be doing a best of because I will be reading at the Willows and Moon bookstore here in Danville at the time I would normally be broadcasting, but it will be a good program that you will enjoy watching if you choose to watch it. And again, thank you for being here. I love spending this time with you. I love all of you. And let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we ask you to help us to remain connected to our roots and connected to our branches. And let us remember that roots are only truly important according to the branches they create, and branches are only truly healthy if they have strong roots. And of course, it is the trunk between that unites them. Let us be the best trunks that we can be, carrying the past into the future and expanding and improving everything we work on. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we know you are always with us, but from respect, we bid you hail and farewell. And may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for joining me today. May you be blessed now and always. And I will see you hopefully on Saturday.